the lost star of Zarin. In the vastness of space, among countless stars and swirling galaxies, there lay a world untouched by pollution and technology, a paradise known as Zarin. It was a planet wrapped in emerald forests and crystal blue oceans, a sanctuary for life, beauty, and power. Zarin's twin suns bathed the land in golden light, their warmth nourishing the radiant flora that pulsed with life. The Zarians, a highly evolved and deeply spiritual race, revered their planet as a living force, a protector and teacher. They possessed unique psionic abilities, drawing strength from Zarin's very core to connect with each other and their world. Lyra, a young Zarian warrior in training, had always felt the deepest connection to her world. But tonight, as she stood on the edge of a cliff overlooking her village, a storm of emotions brewed within her. The village lay quiet under the starlit sky, each home carefully woven into the landscape, reflecting the Zarians' unity with nature. Yet Lyra's heart was far from at peace. Her silver eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were shattered by sorrow and anger, a fire that had been ignited when her family was taken from her. Years ago, during the final days of the human-Zarian war, Lyra had been just a child. Her parents, both warriors of the revered Star clan, had sacrificed themselves to protect Zarin from human invaders. Though her people were deeply connected to peace, they had defended their world with fierce loyalty, using their psionic powers to shield Zarin from those who sought to exploit it. Despite their strength, the humans' advanced technology had nearly overpowered the Zarians. Lyra had watched as her parents fell, leaving her to be raised by the elders of her clan, her heart slowly hardening against all of humanity. Since that day, she had vowed to grow stronger, mastering her powers in the hope that one day she would be able to defend Zarin just as her parents had. Every sunrise, she trained, honing her telekinetic abilities, learning to bend the natural elements, and delving deeper into the mysteries of her mind's potential. Despite her dedication, the loss of her family weighed heavily on her, fueling a hatred for humans that had become her constant companion. Lyra had promised herself that she would never let another human harm her world again. As she stood on the cliff that night, a strange sensation jolted her from her thoughts. A faint tremor vibrated through the ground, a pulse she recognized not as natural, but as an energy disturbance. She looked up, her silver eyes narrowing as she spotted faint glimmers in the dark sky. 3 flashes of light tore across the stars, moving with an intensity that could mean only one thing: battle. Her heart raced, a sense of dread filling her as she reached out with her mind, extending her psionic senses into the atmosphere. She felt them instantly, foreign minds, cold and calculating, with a hunger that set her skin crawling. "The Droll," she whispered. The Droll were among the most feared beings in the galaxy, serpentine creatures encased in an impenetrable, armor-like exoskeleton. They fed on psionic energy, hunting down civilizations like the Zarians, whose mental powers could sustain the Droll for generations. Few had ever seen them and lived to tell the tale, but Lyra had read enough to know that the Droll were relentless and merciless. They would drain the life force of her world until nothing remained. Without a second thought, Lyra turned and sprinted toward the village, her movements aided by her psionic abilities, allowing her to glide effortlessly across the rocky terrain. She reached the outskirts of the settlement and, focusing her mind, sent a telepathic warning to the elders and warriors of her village. They needed to prepare for a battle unlike any they had faced before. But as she approached the central square, Lyra felt her heart sink. The first wave of Drell ships had already broken through the outer defenses. Above her, the sky blazed with fire as Zarian and Drell vessels clashed in an intense aerial battle. Every now and then, an explosion illuminated the night, casting fleeting shadows across the frightened faces of her people below. The once tranquil village had transformed into a war zone, with warriors rushing to mount a defense as best they could. Lyra didn't hesitate. She leaped into the fray, her psionic energy flaring around her as she sent waves of telekinetic force crashing into the nearest Drell ship. The vessel shuddered under her attack, spiraling out of control before colliding with the Earth in a blaze of fire. But the Droll were relentless. For every ship she managed to take down, 2 more appeared to take its place, descending upon her people with brutal efficiency. As the battle raged, Lara felt her strength beginning to wane. Her mind was strained, her body aching, but she refused to give in. She focused on every movement, every breath, driving herself to her limits to protect her home. Just as she was about to launch another wave of psionic energy, a powerful shockwave rippled through the air, knocking her off her feet. She crashed to the ground, dazed, her vision blurring as she struggled to regain her senses. Through the haze, she saw it, a massive Drell warship descending toward the village, its weapons glowing ominously. Her heart raced as she realized her people's defenses wouldn't be able to withstand the force of that vessel. Panic surged through her, and she pushed herself up, ready to face whatever fate awaited her, when suddenly, a new ship appeared in the sky. Sleek and dark, it moved with precision, its weapons firing rapidly at the Drell vessel. Lara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the design of the new ship. It was human. Her emotions twisted into a mix of anger and confusion. What were the humans doing here? Were they here to attack her people again, to finish the destruction they had started years ago? As the human ship cut through the Drell forces, a surge of resentment bubbled within her. She watched, torn between the desire to fight and the strange curiosity of what might be unfolding before her eyes. The human ship swooped low, its engines roaring as it landed near her, kicking up a cloud of dust. Before she could react, the hatch opened, and a figure stepped out, silhouetted by the glow of the ship's lights. The pilot was tall and solidly built, his dark hair cropped short, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in the entire scene with a steady calm. "Get in," he shouted over the chaos. Lara froze, her gaze locking with his. Every instinct in her body told her to refuse, to defend her world against any human intervention. Yet, as she stared into his eyes, she felt something unexpected, an odd connection, a strange pull that she couldn't quite understand. There was a sincerity in his expression, an urgency that made her hesitate. "Now," he repeated, extending his hand toward her. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Lara took a step forward, then another, until she stood close enough to take his outstretched hand. Her mind screamed at her to resist, to turn away, but something in that moment held her back. She climbed aboard, her heart pounding, and as soon as she was inside, the hatch closed, and the ship took off, rocketing away from her endangered world. Inside, an intense silence settled, broken only by the hum of the engines. The reality of what had just happened hit her like a wave, leaving her both shaken and strangely intrigued. As the human pilot, who introduced himself as Kai, focused on the ship's controls, Lara's mind churned with questions. Why was a human risking his life to save her? What were his motives? And, most of all, could she trust him? In the quiet of the ship, Lara felt the weight of her decision settle in. She had left her world behind, trusting an enemy, yet something told her this might be the beginning of a journey she could have never imagined. An uneasy alliance. The silence inside the human ship felt almost deafening, contrasting sharply with the chaotic roar of battle Lara had left behind on Zorin. She sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her body tense and her mind racing. Her silver eyes never left the man seated at the controls, the human who had just saved her life, yet who represented everything she despised. His name, she had learned, was Kai, a pilot of the United Earth Federation, the organization responsible for the war that had shattered her childhood. As he focused on maneuvering the ship through the stars, Lara's mind struggled with an onslaught of conflicting emotions. Kai's face was hard, chiseled with years of experience, yet his eyes held a depth Lara hadn't expected. He moved with a calm precision, a practiced steadiness that came from countless battles. Despite herself, she found her gaze lingering on him, questioning. Why had he risked himself to save her, a Zarian warrior who would have just as quickly fought him? The ship's console emitted a soft beep, and Kai adjusted the controls, steering them toward a hidden nebula. Finally, he broke the silence. "We'll be safe here for a while," he said, his voice low but firm. "The droll won't track us through this nebula. They can't detect our heat signatures in here." Lura's jaw tightened, and she fought the urge to respond with the contempt she felt for his kind. She had to remind herself that the droll were a greater threat than any human. Still, her fingers flexed instinctively, ready to unleash a psionic wave if he tried anything. "What were you doing on Zarin?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Kai glanced at her briefly before turning his attention back to the console. "Looking for survivors. The Drail have been invading planets across the sector. We've been trying to track them and help evacuate anyone we can before it's too late." "Help? Your people don't help. They conquer," Lyra snapped, unable to contain her resentment. "Zarin was peaceful until your Federation came, forcing us into war. You destroyed our homes, took lives, all in the name of peace, and now you want to play the hero." Kay's gaze hardened. "That war was a mistake, one the Federation regrets more than you realize. But the Droll are different. They don't just conquer. They erase entire civilizations. They drain entire planets of life." He paused, his expression momentarily pained. "They've already destroyed half a dozen worlds, and they won't stop. This isn't about territory or resources, it's survival." His words hung in the air, challenging Lyra's long-held hatred. She wanted to hold on to her anger, to blame him and all humans for her pain. But as she looked into Kay's eyes, she sensed a sincerity she hadn't expected. Could it be that this human, this enemy, shared her desperation to protect what was left? "You can believe whatever you want," Kai continued, his tone softening. "But right now, the Droll are hunting us both, and if we're going to survive, we need to work together. I didn't risk my life to save you just to argue over history." Lyra's mind reeled, grappling with the strange reality she found herself in. Here she was, seated beside a human in the depths of space, her only chance of survival resting in the hands of her enemy. The irony gnawed at her pride, but she knew the truth. Without him, she might not have made it out of Zarin alive. "Fine," she said finally, crossing her arms and turning away from him. "But this changes nothing between us." Kai nodded, a faint hint of relief crossing his face. "Good enough for now." As the ship cruised through the nebula, the two sat in silence. Lyra studied the stars outside the viewport, the constellations unfamiliar and alien. She tried to push down the emotions swirling within her, focusing on the mission at hand. The Droll had attacked her home, and now they were after her people. The horror she had witnessed on Zarin played over and over in her mind. The relentless assault, her people fighting and falling, her beloved world scared and burning. The silence was finally broken by the soft hum of a holographic display. A map of nearby star systems flickered to life on the console, showing a network of planets marked in red and green. Kai pointed to a red marker near the outer rim. "The Droll wiped out this planet a week ago. Our intelligence suggests they're moving along this trajectory," he said, tracing a line toward another planet. "If they keep up their pace, they'll reach the central colonies within a month. We're trying to evacuate as many as possible, but they're fast." Lyra took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on the threat at hand. She knew what was at stake. The Droll were not a foe to be taken lightly, and if what Kai said was true, even the most powerful Zarian psionics might not be enough to stop them alone. "So," she said, her voice quieter now, "what's your plan?" Kai leaned forward, a slight smile crossing his face as if he could sense her change in tone. "We need to gather information, find out where the Drell's main fleet is headed, and warn as many people as we can. If we can figure out their tactics and intercept them before they reach the next colony, we might have a chance to slow them down." Lyra frowned, her instincts wary. "And you think I can help you?" He nodded. "Your psionic abilities, they're powerful. You might be able to sense things we can't. track their energy signatures, maybe even disrupt their communication if we get close enough. The thought of using her powers to help a human mission was almost unthinkable, but the thought of watching another world suffer the fate of Zarin was even worse. Reluctantly, she gave a nod. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I won't follow orders from you. This is an alliance of necessity, nothing more." Kai chuckled, a warm sound that caught her off guard. "Understood, warrior of Zarin." As they plotted their course, Kai set the ship on autopilot, letting it drift through the nebula while they prepared for the journey ahead. The weight of her decision settled over Lyra, a mixture of pride and discomfort. She was stepping into uncharted territory, aligning herself with a human, but her instincts told her that this path was the only way forward. The Drell's devastation could not be stopped by pride alone. As she leaned back, her mind drifted to the memory of her parents, warriors of the Star Clan who had given everything to protect their people. They had taught her to value honor, to defend her world with everything she had. But they had also taught her to adapt, to survive by any means necessary. And right now, that meant working with Kai. "Tell me," she said after a while, breaking the silence, "why did you come to Zarin? Why risk your life for a planet that isn't your own?" Kai paused, his gaze distant. "I lost my brother to the Drell. He was stationed on one of the outer colonies, helping with the evacuation when they attacked. By the time we arrived, there was nothing left." His voice grew softer. "I couldn't save him, but maybe I can help save others. It's the only thing that makes sense to me anymore." The weight of his words settled over her. She had assumed all humans were the same, callous, greedy, heartless. But as she listened to Kai's story, she realized that he, too, had known loss, had felt the sting of watching helplessly as someone he loved was taken by forces beyond his control. In that moment, their shared pain bridged the gap between them, if only slightly. Their journey through the nebula continued in tense but determined silence, each of them lost in thoughts of their lost loved ones and the fight ahead. Whatever lay before them, they would face it together, two warriors from different worlds, bound by necessity and a reluctant respect. As the ship emerged from the nebula, the stars stretched wide before them, a vast and uncharted path, and though Lyra still harbored her doubts, a flicker of hope sparked within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to this human than she had allowed herself to see. The void's warning. The ship drifted through the quiet void of space, gliding toward its next destination, an abandoned outpost on the edge of Federation space. As they traveled, Lyra found herself drawn to the stars beyond the viewport, her mind tangled in conflicting emotions. She'd fought to protect her people from humans her whole life, and yet here she was, reliant on one for survival. Every instinct screamed at her to remain vigilant, but each moment she spent with Kai wore away at her old assumptions, casting him in a light she hadn't expected. Kai broke the silence as he navigated, adjusting their trajectory to avoid a small asteroid belt. The outpost isn't far now. It was one of the first bases the Federation established when we began colonizing nearby systems. It's abandoned now, but it has communication equipment that might help us intercept the Drell's signals. Lyra regarded him, curiosity creeping into her voice. Why would they abandon a base so close to the colonies? "Too close to hostile territory," Kai replied, "and after the war with your people, it became harder to maintain outposts. The Federation was forced to retreat to strengthen the central planets. There were just too many resources lost trying to maintain control out here." Lyra's gaze hardened. "It's always about resources with your kind, isn't it?" Kai sighed, his grit on the controls tightening briefly. It was. But not everyone agreed with that mindset. There were people, even back then, who argued against the Federation's expansion. My family was one of them. My parents believed we should have reached out to other species for understanding, not conquest. They were scientists, not soldiers. Her anger softened, if only slightly, as she detected the sincerity in his voice. She had spent years imagining all humans as warmongers, greedy for power and land. But here was a man whose family had fought against those very ideals. It was difficult to reconcile this with her long-held beliefs, and it left her feeling both conflicted and strangely drawn to his story. After a while, they entered the desolate orbit of the outpost planet. Below them stretched an endless landscape of craggy rocks and desolate plains, a barren wasteland. The planet had once thrived with resources, but it was now little more than a graveyard of old mining machinery and crumbling Federation structures. As they touched down on the surface, Lara prepared herself, checking her psionic strength and stretching her mind to sense but any potential threats. Though she trusted her powers, being on an abandoned human base set her on edge. Kai powered down the ship and unstrapped himself. The communications array should be intact, but I'll need your help to access the signal processors. They're encrypted, and our regular access won't work. I'll need you to use your abilities to bypass the security systems. She followed him out of the ship, her boots crunching on the rough ground. Just don't expect me to unlock all your secrets. I'm here to stop the drill, not help you reclaim Federation technology. Kai's mouth quirked into a faint smile. Noted. The two made their way across the cold, metallic hallways of the outpost, passing rooms filled with dust-covered equipment and dim lights that flickered as if struggling against the silence. It felt eerie, like stepping into a forgotten memory. Kai led them to a central control room, where a large holographic screen displayed an inactive galaxy map. Here it is, he said, gesturing to the console. Once we're inside, I'll try to trace the drill's communication signals. If we're lucky, we might get a glimpse of their movements or even locate their fleet. Lura stepped forward, stretching her fingers and focusing her energy. Closing her eyes, she extended her psionic power into the console, letting it snake through the system, slipping past barriers and firewalls designed to keep out intruders. As her energy intertwined with the machine, she felt an odd sensation, a faint tremor, like a whisper in the back of her mind. It felt wrong. Kai, she murmured, keeping her focus on the console. There's something here. Something unnatural. Kai's brow furrowed. What do you mean? It's like a residual presence, lingering just out of reach. I can sense data, encrypted signals, but it's as if something else is hiding within it. Her psionic energy continued probing, and suddenly she hit a wall of dark, pulsating energy. Her breath caught as a vision washed over her. Images of destruction, of cities reduced to ash, planets left barren, as if every life had been consumed. In the vision, she saw the Drail, their twisted forms looming over broken worlds, siphoning the very essence of life from each one. A shiver ran down her spine as the vision faded, leaving her shaken. What did you see? Kai asked, his face full of concern. Lara pulled her hands away, trying to steady herself. The Droll, they're coming for more than resources. They consume life itself, leaving worlds dead and hollow. I don't know if even the Federation understands what kind of destruction they're facing. Kai nodded grimly. The few records we found hint at the same thing. This isn't just another invasion, it's a massacre. If we don't stop them, there won't be any worlds left to fight over. As they worked, Kai attempted to patch into the communication channels, guided by Lyra's psionic insights. She used her abilities to clear pathways through the encrypted data, opening doors that no human would have been able to access alone. It was a strange feeling, working side by side with someone she had once seen as her enemy, sharing in the same mission. But the more time she spent with him, the more her view of humanity began to crack and shift. There was something about Kai, his quiet determination, his unwavering focus on protecting others, that challenged everything she had believed. Though the Federation had brought suffering to her world, this man was unlike any Federation soldier she had ever imagined. Here it is, Kai said suddenly, pulling up a holographic projection of nearby star systems. Red markers blinked on several planets, showing the Drill's progression toward inhabited worlds. They're moving faster than we thought, Kai muttered, zooming in on the trajectory. They'll reach the Adari colonies within a matter of days. Lyra's heart pounded. If we can intercept their main fleet, maybe we can stall them, give the colonies time to evacuate. Kai hesitated. It's risky. The Droll are nearly impossible to fight directly. If we engage, we might be facing certain death. Lyra's gaze hardened. The Zarians faced death when your Federation invaded our world. We fought because we had no other choice. I can't just stand by and watch another world suffer if I have the power to help. A flicker of admiration passed across Kay's face, and he nodded. All right, we'll intercept them. They gathered the coordinates and prepared to depart, making their way back to the ship. As they walked through the desolate outpost, Lyra felt a strange sense of resolve settling over her. She was a warrior, trained to defend her people, but she had never imagined she would find herself defending a human colony. This mission was becoming more than just an alliance of convenience. It was turning into a test of who she was beyond her hatred. Once they were back aboard the ship, Kai set the coordinates, and the vessel hummed to life, accelerating toward the Drell fleet's predicted path. The journey was tense, with both of them running calculations, double-checking equipment, and preparing for what might be the fight of their lives. Despite the grim situation, Lyra found herself feeling an odd comfort in Kay's presence. He was calm, focused, and somehow she knew he wouldn't abandon her, even in the face of danger. As they neared the Drill's location, the ship's alarms blared to life. Lyra watched the console, her heart pounding as a massive dark shape appeared on the screen, looming over them like a predator in the night. There it is, Kai murmured. The Drell mothership. Lyra's psionic senses tingled, and she could feel the raw energy radiating from the massive vessel. It was a fortress, its hull layered with intricate armor, shielding the powerful psionic energy sources within. She could sense the life force it had harvested, the echoes of lives consumed and drained. We're only going to have one shot at this, Kai said, his voice tense. If we can create a disruption in their energy field, it might give us a window to damage their systems. Lyra nodded, her mind focused as she prepared to channel her energy. I'll need you to keep us steady, no matter what. Once I tap into their psionic field, I don't know how much control I'll have. Kay's hand hovered over hers briefly, a silent promise of trust. I've got you, Lyra. Let's do this. With a deep breath, Lyra extended her mind toward the mothership, her psionic energy piercing through the void like a spear. She could feel the resistance, a wall of dark energy pushing back against her, but she pushed harder, breaking through. Her mind connected with the chaotic psionic field of the Drell, and she channeled all her strength, all her fury, into a single burst of power. The ship shuddered as energy pulsed through the void, striking the Drell mothership with a wave that rocked it off course. Alarms blared, the ship trembled, but Kai kept them steady, navigating through the turbulence as they closed in on the Drell's vulnerable point. Now, Kai shouted, and Lyra focused her energy, releasing another surge that broke through the Drell's defenses. A shockwave rippled through the Drell ship, explosions tearing through its hull as their systems overloaded. Lyra felt the strain on her mind, her vision blurring, but she held on, pouring every ounce of strength she had into the assault. Finally, with one last push, the mothership fractured, its once impenetrable frame beginning to break apart. As they sped away, watching the Droll mothership explode in the distance, Lyra sank back, exhaustion washing over her. Kai's hand rested on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the battle they had fought together. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to truly see him, not as an enemy, but as an ally, and maybe, just maybe, as something more. Shadows of sacrifice. The darkness of space enveloped their small ship as it drifted far from the debris field left in the wake of the Droll mothership's destruction. Inside the cockpit, a heavy silence settled over Lyra and Kai as they processed the battle they had narrowly survived. Lyra's strength was drained, her body exhausted from the psionic onslaught she had unleashed. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, she felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. They had dealt a blow to the Drail, but she knew this was only the beginning. Kai piloted the ship, his gaze focused on the display in front of him, but she could sense the tension in his shoulders, the lingering energy of adrenaline that had not yet faded. After a long moment, he finally broke the silence. "We hurt them," he murmured, "but we didn't stop them." Lyra nodded, her expression somber. "They'll regroup, maybe even retaliate stronger than before. The Drell don't give up easily." As if to underscore her words, a faint alert pulsed on the console, drawing both of their attentions. Lyra leaned forward, frowning as she studied the data scrolling across the screen. It was a distress signal, originating from a nearby outpost on the edge of the Adari colonies, the very colonies they'd risked their lives to protect. "The drill must have already reached them," Kai muttered, tightening his grip on the controls. His face was set, his jaw clenched in determination. "We need to respond. If we don't, they'll be overrun." Lyra hesitated, the enormity of the decision pressing down on her. Her energy reserves were low, her powers depleted from the intense battle. She wasn't sure she could muster another psionic attack if they faced more Drail forces. But the distress call reminded her of the responsibility she bore, not just as a Zarian warrior, but as someone who understood the pain of losing everything to invasion. Kai glanced at her, reading the conflict in her expression. "We don't have to do this, Lyra," he said, his voice softer. "No one would blame you if you needed to recover." She took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of her decision, and shook her head. "I can't abandon these people. If there's even a chance we can help, we have to take it." A small, appreciative smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Then let's get moving." Kai set their course for the colony, the ship accelerating as it cut through the blackness of space. They knew little about what awaited them, and the uncertainty gnawed at her, but she steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. This mission was becoming a test not only of their courage, but of their ability to trust each other. Despite her lingering mistrust of humans, Kai had proven himself in the fight against the Drail, and each passing hour spent with him chipped away at her guarded walls. As they neared the colony, the distress signal grew stronger, accompanied by snippets of panicked voices filtering through their comms. The fear in those voices was palpable, and Lyra felt her heart tighten. She knew that terror all too well, the helplessness of watching your world fall apart before your eyes. Her hands clenched into fists, a renewed resolve burning within her. "Get ready," Kai warned as the ship dropped out of hyperspace. The Adari colony loomed before them, a sprawling complex set against the barren, rocky terrain of a remote planet. Smoke rose from several buildings, and small bursts of light indicated ongoing firefights. Drill ships circled overhead, their dark, ominous forms casting long shadows over the colony. "We'll need a plan," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the tension thrumming in her veins. Kai nodded. "The colony's main shield generator is on the eastern side of the complex. If we can reach it and reinforce the defenses, it might give the colonists a chance to evacuate." Lyra considered his plan, running through the risks in her mind. They'd have to navigate through enemy territory and avoid detection if they were going to reach the generator. But there was another concern. She was still recovering from the strain of her last psionic attack, and she didn't know if her abilities would hold up if they faced the Drail again. They landed the ship in a secluded area on the outskirts of the colony, carefully avoiding the main combat zones. As they disembarked, Lara could feel the oppressive energy of the Drail, a dark and hungry presence that permeated the air. Her psionic senses detected the faint stirrings of life nearby, colonists huddled in hiding, frightened but determined to survive. Moving with quiet precision, they navigated through the deserted streets, ducking behind rubble and broken machinery. Every so often, the ground shook as Drail ships passed overhead, their engines emitting an eerie hum. Lyra's eyes remained sharp, her body coiled and ready, but the lack of cover made her feel vulnerable. As they neared the generator, they encountered a group of colonists huddled in a makeshift shelter, their faces pale and hollow with fear. An older man, his hands trembling, looked up as they approached. "Are you here to help us?" he asked, hope flickering in his eyes. Kai nodded, his voice firm and reassuring. "We're going to reinforce the shield generator. Once it's up, you'll have a window to evacuate to the escape shuttles." A young girl clung to her mother, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at Lyra. "Are you going to protect us from the monsters?" Lyra felt a pang in her heart, the child's fear a mirror of her own childhood memories. She knelt beside the girl, offering a gentle smile. "We're going to do everything we can to keep you safe. Be brave, okay?" The girl nodded, her face softening just a little, and Lyra felt a surge of determination. She would not let the drill take these people, not as she had anything to say about it. Leaving the colonists behind, she and Kai moved toward the generator, her senses attuned to every movement around them. They reached the building that housed the shield controls, only to find it guarded by 2 drill sentries, their massive, armored forms blocking the entrance. The creatures hissed, their elongated bodies shifting with an unsettling grace as they scanned the area. Kai glanced at Lyra, a question in his eyes. "Can you handle them?" Lyra nodded, though her pulse quickened. She knew her powers were limited, but she couldn't let doubt creep in now. Centering herself, she focused on the psionic energy within, drawing on every reserve she had left. In a swift motion, she reached out with her mind, sending a surge of force toward the nearest droll. The creature staggered back, hissing in anger as it struggled against the invisible hold she had placed on it. The second droll lunged toward her, but Kai intercepted, firing a well-aimed shot that struck the creature's vulnerable joints. Together, they overpowered the guards, their movements synchronized in a rhythm born of necessity and trust. Inside the generator room, Kai set to work on the controls, rerouting power and amplifying the shield's strength. Lyra kept watch, her senses on high alert. Every sound, every flicker of shadow sent her heart racing, but she held her ground, focused on the task at hand. After a tense few minutes, Kai's voice broke the silence. "It's done. The shield's reinforced. We've bought them some time." Just as he finished, the building trembled and an alarm blared, echoing through the halls. Lyra's stomach clenched. Something was coming. Her psionic senses flared, and she felt the unmistakable presence of a drill commander, its dark energy pulsing with malevolent intent. "We have to move," Kai said urgently, his eyes flicking to the exit. But before they could reach the door, the drill commander appeared, its towering form blocking their path. Its gaze settled on them, its eyes gleaming with a cruel intelligence. Lyra could feel its power, an overwhelming wave of hunger and darkness that sent a chill through her bones. Kai raised his weapon, but the drill commander moved with blinding speed, its armored limbs crashing toward them. Lyra reacted instinctively, sending a psionic wave to deflect the blow, but the force of it sent her stumbling back, her strength wavering. She could feel her energy draining, the strain pushing her to her limits. In that moment, Kai made a split-second decision. He pushed her behind him, positioning himself between her and the drill. "Get to the colonists," he said, his voice firm. "Make sure they get to safety." Lyra's eyes widened. "I can't leave you." "Go," he shouted, his voice filled with a determination that left no room for argument. "You have a better chance of surviving this than I do. I'll hold it off." Her mind screamed in protest, but she knew he was right. With a final, lingering look at him, she turned and ran, her heart heavy with a mix of gratitude and fear. She made her way back to the colonists, urging them to move toward the evacuation shuttles, her voice steady even as her mind churned with worry. As they boarded the shuttles, Lyra cast one last glance back at the shield generator. She couldn't see Kai, but she felt his presence, a steady, unwavering force that seemed to reach out to her even across the distance. When the shuttles lifted off, taking the colonists to safety, Lyra felt a pang of sorrow and respect for the human who had become her unlikely ally. He had risked everything to protect her people, and she knew she would carry that sacrifice with her forever. In that moment, Laura understood the true depth of courage and loyalty, and as the stars stretched out before her, she made a silent vow. This fight wasn't over. She would continue Kai's mission, fighting not just for her world, but for all worlds threatened by the Drail, carrying with her the memory of a human who had shown her what it meant to sacrifice for others. The battle had changed her, and as she drifted into the unknown, she knew that her journey was only beginning. The heart of a warrior. As the escape shuttle sped through the darkness of space, Laura sat silently at the viewport, her gaze lost in the stars. Her thoughts remained fixed on Kai and the fierce battle he faced alone. Her last sight of him, a steadfast figure, standing between her and a relentless Drell commander, haunted her. She wanted to believe he was still fighting, still holding on, but deep down, a gnawing fear suggested otherwise. The colonists around her were exhausted, some slumped in silence, while others whispered in fear and confusion. They had barely survived the Drell assault, thanks to Kai's sacrifice. His actions had saved them, but to Lyra, that victory felt hollow. She clenched her fists, the pain of her drained powers a reminder of how close she had come to breaking her own vow. She had sworn never to leave anyone behind, and yet here she was, alive, while he fought for his life alone. After what felt like an eternity, the shuttle's pilot announced their arrival at a nearby Federation outpost, a small station on the edge of the Adari system. As the shuttle docked, the colonists filed out, guided by station medics and officers. Lyra remained seated, her mind fixed on the Drell commander, the enemy Kai had faced alone. She knew she couldn't rest until she knew his fate. A Federation officer approached her, his face lined with sympathy. "Miss, are you all right? We can arrange medical assistance if you need it." She shook her head, rising to her feet. "I don't need help, but I need a ship, one with a long-range tracker." The officer's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, but all vessels here are under strict command protocols. We can't simply hand over." "Listen to me," she interrupted, her voice edged with urgency. "A Federation pilot. Kai, stay behind to protect this shuttle. If he's still out there, I need to find him. I owe him my life, and I won't leave him behind." The officer hesitated, clearly taken aback by her intensity. After a pause, he nodded. "All right, we have a scout ship in the hangar. I can't guarantee it will hold up against the Drail, but it's fast and equipped with a basic tracking system. I'll arrange for your departure clearance." Without waiting for a formal dismissal, Lyra made her way to the hangar, her steps resolute. She was exhausted, her psionic abilities strained to their limits, but her determination burned brighter than ever. Kai had risked everything to protect her, and she would do the same. In the hangar, she quickly familiarized herself with the scout ship's controls. It was a sleek, compact vessel, built for speed and stealth rather than combat, but it would have to be enough. As the engine rode to life, she set her course, relying on her instincts and the faint traces of Kai's last coordinates. The stars blurred as she engaged the ship's thrusters, her mind sharpening with focus. She pushed her senses outward, searching for any sign of Kai's presence, stretching her psionic abilities to their limits. After what felt like hours, she caught a faint energy trail, an echo of a recent battle, barely detectable but unmistakable. She followed the trail, her heart pounding as she approached the shattered remains of the shield generator complex. The landscape was eerily silent, the ground littered with debris and twisted metal. Lyra brought the ship down in a quiet clearing nearby and disembarked, scanning the area with both her eyes and her senses. She felt the lingering traces of psionic energy, a chaotic mix of her own and the dark, insidious presence of the Drell commander. Her skin prickled as she pushed forward, her instincts guiding her toward the remains of the battle. After a few tense moments, she spotted movement among the rubble. There, slumped against a broken piece of machinery, was Kai. His face was bloodied, his uniform torn, but he was alive, Barely. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him and pressing her hand against his shoulder. "Kai," she whispered urgently. "Kai, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, and he managed a faint smile. "Back so soon, huh?" His voice was weak, but laced with a familiar humor that brought a flicker of relief to her heart. She gently helped him sit up, examining his injuries. "You're lucky I came back," she said, a tremor in her voice. "What were you thinking, fighting that Drell commander alone?" Kai grimaced, struggling to keep his eyes open. Didn't have much of a choice. Someone had to buy you time to get the colonists out. "Your bravery is reckless," she replied, trying to keep her tone steady. But in truth, her heart ached at the thought of losing him. Against her will, he had become more than just an ally in this war. He had become someone she respected, maybe even trusted. He chuckled weakly. "Reckless is just another word for committed, right?" A faint smile crossed her face, but it faded quickly as she noticed the severity of his injuries. "You need medical attention. I'll take you back to the outpost." Kay's hand gripped her wrist gently, stopping her. "No," he said, his voice steady despite his pain. "We can't go back yet. The Droll aren't finished. That commander, he mentioned something before the fight. They're planning a larger assault, something that could wipe out the entire Adari sector. We have to warn the Federation, tell them what we know." Her heart sank as she realized the weight of his words. She knew the Droll's appetite for destruction, but to think they would launch a coordinated attack on such a massive scale was almost unthinkable. She wanted nothing more than to bring him to safety, to see him healed and out of harm's way, but his sense of duty mirrored her own. "All right," she said, her resolve hardening. "But you're in no condition to go back into combat. Let me take the lead on this." He opened his mouth to protest, but she held up a hand, her expression leaving no room for argument. "You saved my life. Twice now. Let me return the favor." Reluctantly, he nodded, allowing her to help him to his feet. Together, they made their way back to her scout ship, Kai leaning heavily on her as they crossed the battlefield. She was hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow, but the area remained still, as if the drill forces had already moved on to prepare for their next attack. Inside the scout ship, she helped him into the co-pilot's seat, quickly activating the ship's tracking systems. As she programmed a direct course to the Federation's main command center, she glanced over at him, her gaze filled with determination. "We're going to end this," she said firmly. "No more colonies, no more innocent lives lost. I won't rest until the Drell are stopped." Kay's tired eyes met hers, a spark of pride in his gaze. "I believe you, Lyra. I've seen what you can do." She turned back to the controls, her mind churning with plans and possibilities. They would need allies, resources, and a strategy that could match the Drell's ruthless efficiency. This fight would demand everything they had, and then some. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. A belief that, together, they might just stand a chance. The journey to the Federation's main command was long, giving them both time to recover, at least partially. She monitored Kai's vitals closely, her psionic energy reaching out to ease his pain where she could. He slept fitfully, murmuring at times, lost in memories she couldn't see. She found herself watching over him, the walls she had built around her heart softening with each passing hour. Finally, they arrived at the Federation outpost. As the ship docked, a medical team rushed forward, guiding Kai away to the infirmary. He gave her one last, lingering look over his shoulder, a silent promise that this battle wasn't over. Alone, Lara made her way to the command center, her presence drawing curious and wary glances from the Federation personnel. She approached the command officers, her voice steady and resolute as she relayed the information about the impending Drell assault. The officers listened in silence, their expressions grim as they took in the magnitude of the threat. As she concluded her report, the senior officer, a grey-haired woman with sharp eyes, nodded thoughtfully. "We'll mobilize our forces, but this will take time. The Droll are a formidable enemy, and we can't afford any mistakes." Lyra's gaze was fierce. Mistakes aren't an option. I'll lead the strike if I have to. My people have defended our world alone, but this fight affects all of us. The Federation, the colonies, if we don't unite now, will fall one by one. The officer studied her, then gave a nod of respect. Your bravery is noted, Lyra. We'll do everything in our power to prepare. You'll have full access to our resources. As Lyra left the command center, she felt the weight of responsibility settle over her, heavier than ever. The Drell assault was imminent, and they were the last line of defense, but she wasn't alone this time. With Kai by her side and the Federation mobilizing, they had a fighting chance. Later, she visited the infirmary, where Kai rested in a recovery pod. He looked up as she entered, a faint smile on his face. They tell me you convinced the entire command to prepare for war. I didn't know you had it in you. She smirked, folding her arms. There's a lot you don't know about me, human. He chuckled, a sound that sent warmth through her heart. I look forward to learning. They shared a moment of understanding, a bond forged in battle and strengthened by sacrifice. As they prepared for the coming fight, Lyra knew she would give everything to protect their worlds, just as he would. And though their journey had begun in conflict, she felt a newfound sense of purpose, a purpose shared with a man who had once been her enemy, but was now something far more than an ally. In the face of the Drell threat, they would stand united, and together, they would fight for the future of all they held dear.